Mark in Mississippi. How you doing this week?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
What's up, Mark?
Yeah. You're on with Jamie and Dan, and it says you're a repeat caller about intelligent design. So would you like to...
I called on Mother's Day, and we had a good talk, and I was invited to call back and spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I'm going through all your shows and listening to all the things you have to say and trying not to be redundant. I think you've handled a lot of the arguments well, and I don't want to go down the same rabbit hole.
Thank you. Like and subscribe.
And I have liked and subscribed, and there's a reason I really like your show. Even though I come down on the side of theist, I'm an open-minded theist, and I like to have these discussions. And as you know, you can't express any kind of doubt in the church conversation. You have to be, you have to come down solidly, usually to be accepted on the young earth creationist side of things, and they can't do that. You know, I'll talk about my thoughts and on the theist, but if you want to express any thought, you know, like I mentioned last time, I don't believe in biblical inerrancy, so I'm not going to argue for the flood and all that. So I'm very open-minded. Ultimately, I'm searching for the truth, and when I went back and read through the comments, I thought the atheist community that was commenting, they were very supportive. You know, I was very appreciative of that. So, having said all that, I've been doing some research on the flagella, which, as you know, is a hot topic with irreducible complexity and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's usually, I've usually heard it described to, you know, prove that DNA is too complicated and evolution can't be accurate because... Yeah, are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
yes.
It's like it's one of those things where people cite as like the complexity and its functions wouldn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective to develop the way that it has, and yeah, that's the argument.
To be clear, people that are not evolutionary biologists say that.
Yes, well, yes, that's the talking point, right? Yeah.
So, Mark, for our audience, why don't you fill them in on the flagellum, or at least an approach to your argument via flagellum, and what that is all about?
Well, I'm not real caught up on irreducible complexity per se, because I've been researching, you know, what the science is on it and the many parts that play a role in it. So I could see the argument against that. But still, you know, and there's all different kinds of flagella in prokaryotes. And so I've been looking at that, and I've been watching the video series of how creationism taught me real science. Are you familiar with it?
I am not, but it sounds like something that I should be familiar with.
Not sure I'm familiar with it either.
Yeah.
Really? In my research, watching some stuff on YouTube, I was referred to that. And it's a good series. He researches a lot of topics and tries to tie it in a scientific explanation. Like I just watched one earlier today on the mitochondrial Eve and that subject, and he addresses a lot of interesting subjects, so I recommend it. I think it's more from a scientific viewpoint than a creationist viewpoint. But what I'm seeing is, in my review of literature, and I really just started looking at this week, and you may have some other references or recommendations for me to study this. But he goes through, you know, this is how you get a flagella, and you start with the type 3 secretory system, and, you know, just add this protein. He adds about 15 proteins to it, and he's like, voila, now you have a flagellum. And I'm kind of like, I haven't seen an evolutionary, say, a mutational explanation for that. What I'm seeing is we're going from A to Z, but I'm not seeing how a mutation causes that, how natural selection affects that change. And what a lot of literature is saying is we will at some point in time be able to explain this, but we can't now. And to me, that what I'm saying is there's still a faith component in the science that says this is natural selection, and I'm seeing creation in this.
Well, let me, before we start with this, well, Mark, let me first say, I'm glad, going back to what you previously said, that you're able to find other people, other atheists and stuff, who are kind of open-minded to what you have to say. I think that's really good. I never grew up as a young earth creationist. I grew up kind of quasi-Methodist, but I agree with you with your comments as far as, like, it's hard in, like, a particular church setting to kind of have these kinds of conversations. You know, when you're going to church, you're expecting other people to kind of, you know, think the way you do and stuff, and, like, pushing boundaries there isn't exactly as safe as it is, as, you know, it is online, where people kind of have these discussions and stuff. So first, I just want to commend you for, you know, having conversations with people about this stuff. The other thing I'd say is, yeah, you know, we use the word faith in a lot of different ways, and an implicit trust in something is kind of what I'm getting at here, in the sense of, like, oh, we trust that we will have an explanation for this in the future. And, like, you're right, like, there is some sort of trust in something that is actually, like, currently unknowable, right? Like, I don't know for sure that we'll ever have an evolutionary explanation for that as well. But I think when we have these kinds of conversations, we also have to think about how evolution has explained so much of the world that we already have come to know, and how it seems to fit a lot of the evidence that we found. Whereas, I mean, if we're talking about a creationist perspective, you know, from what I've seen, you can easily do the same thing with a lot of things that don't make as much sense. I'm trying to think of some, like, the appendix, for example. I mean, some people have found some, like, you know, explanations for why the appendix is there. I had mine removed when I was a kid, and I always make the joke to people, like, well, if it was designed there, I mean, either I did something wrong to it or God did something wrong to it, because it had to get taken out, and God didn't pay for my health insurance, so, you know, like, something went wrong there. But, you know, like, I see what you're getting at, where there's a kind of frustration as far as, like, oh, well, they always say that evolution is the answer. And my response to that initially is, yeah, because, I mean, usually it kind of is. You know, usually we've been able to find explanations for, like, just a variety of different problems over the years, and I wouldn't be surprised to find that evolution would be an explanation for it. Again, you know, I don't know enough about that particular subject to say one way or the other, but that's my take. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, so my response would start with, when you say that there's an element of faith in the science, I'd ask you to clarify what you mean by faith.
Well, there's a belief in things that are not yet proven, but may become proven. Very similar to what Dan just said. You know, so you haven't proven that part of it.
Well, I know that I haven't. I'm less familiar with where the science is as far as concluding, but the thing that I would describe now is that belief is not binary at all, particularly in science. It has various degrees of confidence, and in science, science done properly handles that very, very, very well. And in you know, layman's terms, or lay people's terms, women can be lay people as well. It's 2019. You know, not all women are experts in things.
Okay, we get it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hey, hashtag feminism. All right. Back off.
You good.
Son. But in layman's terms, people believing something usually describes a level of confidence that you wouldn't have in science. So, for example, when you talk about the appendix, there's actually a relatively good understanding of how things develop, and something being having an evolutionary history that we do understand doesn't necessarily mean that it is beneficial, right? So we think about evolution selecting for what is, you know, selecting for things through sexual selection or natural selection or survival, that kind of thing. But it doesn't always yield the best results, right? Like, there's whatever the name of that nerve is in a giraffe's neck that starts at the back of the top of the neck, goes all the way down, and then all the way back up to the front of the back of the neck, up to a place that's like less than 3 inches away.
I think that's the recurrent laryngeal nerve. I think it's the recurrent laryngeal nerve.
Yeah, I was less familiar with the name. So when you say that there's a belief in things not yet in evidence, I have a hard time believing that the current scientific consensus is a confident assertion that, you know, X is true despite not having evidence, right? Like, there are things that are commonly believed to, oh, the science is settled on this. For example, things that prompted the extinction of the dinosaurs. it's commonly believed that, oh, there's a broad consensus on it, that question is answered. And there are parts of that question that are open still.
Right.
So when you start talking about, oh, there's a faith in the science, I don't see it.
Well, what I see in a lot of the videos that I watch is that subject kind of is glossed over. Oh, natural selection did this, and then we got all these steps, and thus we have evolution. And where I'm coming at it from is I can see the transitional forms. There's clear evidence of that. And where I'm arguing is that I think, instead of this being from random mutation, I think we don't get these new traits without a creator. That's where I see the creators.
So there's
modifications of these traits.
Do you think random mutations ever happen at all in nature?
Absolutely, they do. And when we see them, we tend to see them acting on existing traits. I'm not aware of any evidence of new traits coming out from these mutations.
Okay.
And if you know that, I'm more than willing to research that and look that up.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, and then I'll let Jamie ask what he wants to ask, is if you know for a fact that random mutations do happen, and if you also know that, but some of these are also designed, what's your criteria for telling the difference between the two?
I think if I can see a mutation and all of a sudden you have something new, like the flagella, I think is an excellent area to study because it's a fairly primitive trait, and it's easy to study bacteria. That would be a good thing. If I saw, for example, if you had some bacteria that do not have flagella and you put them, in a substance and they evolve flagella de novo, I would find that very, very convincing if you can show that happened, if that's purely from mutation.
So it sounds like to me that you're saying that beneficial mutations necessarily have to be designed mutations.
Well, that's where I'm leaning. That I don't see how you can mutate your way into a fully functioning eye. I've seen the explanations of how the eye evolves and where the eye starts, but I want to see more of the process through pure random mutation as opposed to theistic designed mutation.
So when you say theistic design mutation, I have a almost entirely complete problem with that as a concept that's being discussed, because at a fundamental level I think it's flawed. But in terms of what you're talking about, understanding the process of evolution as far as specific organs like the eye coming about, that's an entire field of evolutionary biology, is the study of eyes and things like that. And so if as you're saying, you've heard the explanation, I don't understand how you can come to a conclusion that there isn't an explanation, right? Like I don't know where you've looked for your explanation or what you've found, but it's relatively conclusive, at least as far as the human eye, the steps through which it went, right? Photosensitive cells, a greater number, starting to get concave until you get to a pinhole camera, right? Like the problem I think with some of these explanations, particularly the ones that are designed at kids, is they don't emphasize how long every single part of that takes, which is not just millions of years, but tens of millions, and in most cases hundreds of millions of years for things like that. So it's not, and when they show diagrams to kids or they're trying to explain it for all of us lay people, they tend to show like a single individual creature evolving through, but really they should show a representation of probably 100,000 creatures, some of which get some of the beneficial mutation, and most of them die. And the ones that don't have it die at a greater rate. So right. There's parts of this that when it's explained become kind of, well, it doesn't would give someone the impression of, well, that seems convenient. But no, I mean, where are you as far as your understanding of how, for example, something like the eye would develop, keeping in mind that I don't know the stages of the evolution of even the human eye? but mostly I'm asking about the concept.
Right. The guy who produced the video, How Creationism Taught Me Science, actually the preceding video to his on the flagella is about evolution of the eye. So I just watched that recently, and he does a good job of explaining exactly what you were referring to.
Right. Do you watch any videos not produced by creationists?
I don't watch any creationist videos. I don't think they're
so
very scientific. So I've watched
we
lots of stuff
agree
by
with
Aaron
you.
Ra.
Yeah. So then let me clarify. This person that said that creationism taught me science. What is their take on evolution?
I think it's not real clear to me. I don't want to misquote him, but my impression is that he is not a creationist, but he probably was raised to be one and has since looked at the science. So he does not come down on the side of creation. This is not a creationist-sponsored video series. It's more, I think he's more atheistic or agnostic, but he hasn't made that clear to me. But he tends to come down on the side of evolutionary thought and evolutionary thinking.
That's probably good.
I think you would like the videos.
Cool.
Yeah. Throw a link in the YouTube comments, and when I go back and watch the video and read the comments, I'll be able to find that link. I've just remembered a resource that I can recommend to you that I think would be helpful, depending on how much you enjoy or have time to read entire books. But the book Why I Believed, which is by, I forget the author's name, basically chronicles the author's process through basically shift from being a creationist to being a less fundamentalist Christian, and why he began to doubt and ultimately not believe that creationism explained the diversity of life on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that would be worth one. Now, keep in mind, I don't know if you remember this from last time, that I started out, very conservative Christian, as many of you listeners have. But I went a long time without even going to church or doing anything. I went about 17 years, didn't go to church, quit. And I was still more of a theist. I just felt like I couldn't go. I was going to go to hell anyway, so I might as well enjoy life. And actually, I used to be a practicing medical doctor. And because I was leading the atheist lifestyle, more hedonistic, and I used to jokingly say that I wouldn't belong to a church that would have me as a member because I felt I couldn't live up to those requirements. So I tended to be more involved with atheist community and atheist type activities. But I kind of came back. But I was selectively prosecuted. I was treating pain, and I got shut down by the DEA and had to find a new career. But my partner, who was not as outspokenly non-Christian, he wasn't prosecuted at all. So part of me feels like I was prosecuted because of my open-mindedness and my non-Christian values.
Well, I can't speak to the bias of any DA, presumably in the state of Mississippi. But in terms of talking about, you called in the notes here is to talk about intelligent design. Other than not seeing how the grander process of evolution by natural selection can explain the diversity of life on Earth, in particular the development of evolutionary traits, as you phrased it, or new genetic code, I think is probably to the point. Other than that, is there something that leads you to believe that intelligent design is an explanation?
I think ultimately it comes down that I see DNA as a code, and I would say that I can't see how a series of random errors could get us from a one-celled organism to the complex eukaryotic organisms we are now.
Okay, but can you see how evolution would?
I can see evolution, I can see the process, and I can see evolution working with the creator behind it.
Well, but you
That's
can't.
where I'm at now in my research.
Okay, because you've said random mutations and random chance a few times. Hopefully there's an understanding that doesn't describe evolution.
How would you describe it differently than random chance?
Evolution is scientifically is defined as the change in allele frequency over time, but the process that led to the diversity of life on Earth is evolution by natural selection. So it's not just things randomly changed. I rolled the dice, all of them again and again until I got Yahtzee. It's I rolled the dice, and the ones that were high numbers or sixes I kept, or at least they were not naturally selected out of the process, and the other ones got re-rolled. Effectively, or at least they didn't show up in the next generation.
I would add, there is an environment that is putting pressures into the system for allele frequencies to change in one way or another. Animals that live in colder climates, the ones that survive in those climates, are going to have the frequency changes towards being able to live in those environments better over periods of time, right? I mean, that's just a little example, but we see this all the time. I mean, there are blind fish, for example, like fish who live in caves that don't need their eyes anymore because they've changed. Their environment has caused them to lose their sight. There's lots and lots of examples you can find in this, and in our fossil record as well, of animals who are found in these environments, like in Texas, for example. In the Central Texas area, you can go to the mammoth site where you can actually find mammoths and even camels. Like camels used to live here as well. It doesn't make sense for mammoths and camels to really live in the environment here now, but the environment has changed, and those animals were living here when the environment was different. And the world is changing all the time with new environments, and the animals are kind of changing with it. And evolution is kind of explaining why this is happening, how this is happening, right?
Right, and I agree with natural selection selects traits. I don't see how natural selection causes traits to originate that can be selected. That seems to arise through mutation, and I don't think mutation is adequate. Now, I'm open-minded about this. People may post some stuff right now while they're watching, and I'll research all that. I'm not just being dogmatic.
Yeah. So you've highlighted one of the things that doesn't. That, if I were trying to create a system that would lead to life on Earth, it's interesting because the evolutionary process doesn't as frequently create new traits like you're talking about, or at least, and oftentimes entire species die out. 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth are dead. And in large part, that's because natural selection found the entire selection wanting, and now they're gone.
I think what Mark is talking about is the criticism I've actually heard of evolution before. It's this idea that, so you can see the mutations are there, but how did the molecules that allow for those mutations to be there in the first place get to be there so that the mutations could happen, right? How could the molecules get there?
I'm not sure. It's that I think it's mutation of new traits rather than the mutation of, some people are taller and shorter, and if we become, if humans become cave-dwelling people, Dan and his progeny are screwed because he's tall. And so eventually some of them might be shorter and shorter because then they wouldn't hit their heads as much.
Move to big caves.
Well, yes, and then there would be a population of people that live in taller caves, and they might be taller, and a population of people that live in shorter caves that might be shorter. And so the selecting between more tall and less tall, I think, is a concept, at least as far as I'm reading what you're saying, Mark, that you can say, okay, I can see how that happened. But the concept of, having echolocation arising isn't necessarily one that you can accept, although that's a modification of...
Yeah, I think we've got examples of modern-day evolution, which you pointed out when I called last time. And I'm not arguing against anything that science has shown. I just don't think science has shown how these new traits arise. Because I think natural selection selects traits that are in existence, but it doesn't produce the new traits that we're selecting against.
If you... I understand. I think that I'm mostly got the gist of what you're saying, and I think that I understand it. What your point is sufficiently now, which is that evolving a new trait. So, for example, going from a one-cell organism to an organism with flagella. Right. Before then, there wasn't anything like a flagella, and then after a period of time there was. The random mutations that occur, oftentimes they're terrible, right? And they result in, well, actually most of them are irrelevant and don't change anything and can't be selected for or against by evolution because they don't affect the success of an individual in a species, individual's, prolificness, if you will.
Right.
Some of them are harmful, right? If you develop a mutation where you randomly die if something sudden happens, that mutation is going to be selected out of the population by natural selection, because if you die before you can have too many children, you have fewer children, or a creature has fewer children. You know the general process of evolution. But in terms of small and random changes, right, of new traits, those occur somewhat, right? Like there's, even in humans, there's, I guess people born with quasi-third arms and that sort of thing, or other parts in that. And there's research out there, I think. Mark, do you use Reddit at all?
I've heard you mention Reddit, and I've been on there once or twice, but really haven't had a chance to engage it. But it seems like a useful resource that I intend to use more in the future.
So what I was going to say is Talk Heathen has a Reddit, r/Talk Heathen, and I think at this point, basically, the conversation can't really progress without specific citations, and I'm not an encyclopedia, so I can't provide them.
I'll give one specific recommendation as well, Mark. If you like YouTube stuff and you like watching creationist stuff, there's a guy I know on YouTube named Paul Ogia, who is a former fundamentalist Christian who actually covers Ken Ham and his kind of Week in Genesis news thing that he does every week.
Yeah.
He actually covers that every week, and he kind of breaks down why some of that stuff is kind of misleading or wrong. And he talks about creationism and just Bible stuff in general. He's a great channel that I'd recommend to check out as well.
Hi, Paul.
What's his name?
His name's Paul Ogia. It's like apologist almost, except his name is Paul, so it's Paul Ogia, right? Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But, I don't consider Ken Ham any kind of an authority.
That's good. Yes.
Bill Nye.
Yeah, Bill Nye.
I stay away from creationists because every now and then I'll listen to one of them, but then I'll always go back to the sciences. My philosophy is to don't counteract good science, but look where science has gaps, and then try not to argue too much from incredulity, which you nailed me on last time. But I'm just looking for the truth like everybody else, and I encourage what you all do. My daughter texted me about a year ago and asked me what I thought of evolution, because she's being raised to go to church and she's a good girl. She's 14.
Sorry to hear that.
I said, you got to look at evolution. You need to learn evolution and then make your own decision. So I encourage open-mindedness in my children.
Well, that's good.
That's wonderful.
All right, so Mark, we're gonna move on to
the. Yeah, Mark, just keep having conversations with people, man. That's the best thing you can do, right? Yeah. That's the best thing we can all do.
So we're gonna move on to the next call now. But thank you for calling in, Mark, and I hope that you find a link to the book that I referenced in the show notes. We'll have a link to Paul Gia. Someone will put it in the comments on this, and then also Reddit /r/Talk Heathen is going to be a good resource. But hopefully we'll keep in touch. All right, I think that was a good one.
Yes.
I think I didn't get back to pure randomness doesn't describe evolution as much as I would have liked, but I don't know. Any last thoughts?
Well, it's like I said, I never grew up with the young Earth creationist mindset. I've told this story before on Truth Wanted, but I always grew up with dinosaur books and them saying, 60 million or however many million years ago, all this stuff is happening. 65, thank you. That's the number I was looking for. I remember the first time I ever encountered like a Christian young Earth creationism was it was late night, and it was like the 700 Club or something was on, and somebody was talking about the book of Job, and they were describing the Leviathan, and then somebody showed a picture of like a dinosaur and was like, see, look, this description in Job is kind of like this dinosaur thing. And I remember asking my dad the next day, I was like, hey, is that kind of true? He's like, well, some people kind of believe that, but like it's,
but they're wrong, son.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how, like I'm not predisposed to have a belief in young Earth creationism because I never grew up around that, right? Like and like when I hear it now, like a lot of those arguments sound silly, but I can definitely see how if you grew up in kind of that world, it kind of makes more sense, especially if you weren't as knowledgeable about evolution. I mean, Lord knows I wasn't when I was a kid either, But
who knows? That's the your Christian upbringing has stuck with you more.